Welcome to the E'Claire Makery Podcast Season 2. I am so excited today to welcome Christine of Ambassador Crochet. She is going to share about tech editing and why you need a tech editor. So go ahead and Christine, introduce yourself and kind of tell us a little bit about what you do.
I'm Christine. I am from Ambassador Crochet. I started pattern designing in 2007. And I started tech editing in 2012, I believe. I kind of was a math major in college, accounting major, so that comes from that's where my love of math comes from.
Yeah.
Math. And it has just kind of snowballed, and that's become the majority of my business is tech editing now instead of designing, or maybe 50-50.
That's really cool. I love how you can bring the creative side of crochet along with the math and kind of blend them together.
Everybody used to tell me, you're so creative. And I'd say, but I'm not. I don't feel like I have that creative brain. And I think I can incorporate that problem solving or those math skills into the design work. And that's what I thrive on. It's not necessarily the pretty colors and
it's more like
more
puzzle.
I'm going to figure this out.
Right. Oh no, my husband's the same way. Before I started using a tech editor, he would be my tech editor, and I'd have to be like, did I do this math right? Because he was an engineer and he really loves math. Like, he likes to do it for fun. So
that's me. The harder something is to figure it out, the more likely I would be to sit there and get engrossed in it.
Right. I know. I've somehow been able to start enjoying pattern math because it's like a puzzle, and I like solving puzzles. And so if I can just find those keys that will unlock it, then that's great.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of people don't really know what tech editing is. I didn't know what it was for a really long time. Could you explain what is tech editing?
Tech editing is taking your pattern and making sure, so I will use a couple different examples. If you have a baby blanket, you're going to use a tech editor to make sure all the stitch combinations match up. If your beginning chain is one number off, nothing will work. There will be a problem with the pattern. If you have garments and there's multiple sizes, then a tech editor will actually do the math on all those sizes. Some tech editors will actually grade your garment for you and add in a size if you're missing a size somewhere. They make sure your gauge matches your finished size. So they do the math on the measurements. They do the math on the stitch counts to make sure everything works together and that the finished product will actually be what you're writing down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I didn't realize how valuable that tech editors were until recently when I started making garments again, and now I cannot live without having someone check my stuff.
Yeah, and I think the more you design, I think the more you need a tech editor. If it's that first one, I think you're over cautious, you're over, I don't know what other word to use, but you tend to put in those extra hours to make sure all your math is correct. You test every size, you write every size. I think the more you do it, not that you miss things, not that you don't take the care, but I think you know what you're saying after a while. But Can somebody else read it the way you mean it? And I even find that with my own patterns. I can't tech edit my own patterns because I know what they're supposed to say. So that's the value of somebody else looking at your patterns is somebody else going to read it, do the math the way I meant it to be.
Right. Yeah, because I know that for myself, when I write it, it makes total sense. But I've really been seeing, like with my colorwork sweaters, having to figure out how can other people actually read these? Because I can look at something, I know exactly what I'm supposed to do, and having someone look at that and be able to be like, okay, here is like, what in the world are you saying right here?
Yeah.
I understand that. And even figuring out I've been learning grammar, pattern grammar, stuff that I didn't even know that I like was wrong with that.
Yeah.
Oh, if I would have just changed these couple words, it would have made it a lot
It's
better.
not that you're wrong, it's that there's an easier way for somebody else to understand it that would make more sense to everybody, as opposed to that intermediate crocheter that can kind of understand what you mean because they buy your patterns all the time and they understand what you're saying. Whereas if you can write a pattern that anybody can read, you can reach all crocheters.
Right. Yeah, that's so important because I think that we get lost in that, oh, if it makes sense to me, it'll make sense to everyone, but
Yeah.
it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. What have been, like, besides having someone to be able to look at your pattern, what are the different valuable things about having a tech editor look at your patterns?
So I also work for a couple publishers and I edit for them. And I think the biggest takeaway that I have learned working with both independent designers and publishers of magazines, books, yarn companies, whatever, is that there's more to it than just writing a pattern. It's consistency. It's, even as an independent designer, you should always write your patterns in the same style. Some of it is a variation thing. I work for one publisher, and every time you see the word repeat, there is a semicolon before that word repeat. That is the way they want it. Like, so some tech editors, if you get into editing for publishers, books, they want that consistency. They want every comma in the same spot all the time. They want periods at the end of every line, or they don't want periods at the end of every line. And you don't think those things make a big difference until you get a pattern from somebody and they've always written it the same way, and all of a sudden it's different. And then you wonder if they've always had a period at the end of their sentences and then they don't, you kind of wonder, did my page cut off? Am I missing directions? Like, it's those little things that you wouldn't think matter. But when you are consistent and then you switch something, all of a sudden somebody else notices and goes, well, wait, is there something wrong? Is it missing? So you want that consistency. And that's one big thing that I've learned, is be consistent with your writing, even so that the crocheter is reading it consistently all the time.
Yeah. And I know that after I started getting my patterns tech edited, started learning how I should be writing them to be easier, I went back and looked at some of my old patterns, and I was horrified at the way that I wrote it. Like my llama wall hanging, which is one of my most popular patterns, I went back and read it, and I was like, what was I thinking? Because in my color work stuff, I was labeling it as colors, like, oh, you're white and you're cream, instead of saying like your main color and your contrast color, so that it can apply to any color. But I looking back,
something that is you learn as a designer and you grow as a designer, and the longer you do it, the more you see those things. So one of the big things I picked up on in my pattern writing and when I started tech editing was, it's those little things that you think aren't a big deal, but they're a huge deal to the crocheter. Like, so I write every pattern like the person has never picked up a crochet hook before.
Ooh, yeah.
Because then you are reaching an audience. I have even a couple intermediate patterns that beginner crocheters have been able to work through, because I've tried to take that stance and write it from a perspective of, if this person has never picked up a hook, what would they need to know? What would help them through this pattern?
Yeah, I really like that. I've been trying to do that for my color work garments, just because it's something that's not really done in crochet a lot. And so I've been really trying to look at it and be like, how can I make this so that someone who's never done color work can do this? And it's been really cool to see, like, as I've been developing what is the best way to write these patterns, and my testers, a lot of them have never done color work before, but like with one of my latest patterns, my Honey BT, they, like, so many people have never done color work, they are making it and just soaring through it because it's easy to read, but having to figure that out was so hard.
And I think sometimes the longer we write patterns, the more we just assume people know. And I
Right.
don't think it's an intentional thought. I think it's just something that becomes everyday knowledge to us. Like, whether you compare it to just a single crochet or driving a car, like those, and putting your blinker on, like it's those things that you do all the time that become habit. But to somebody that's never done it, it's not habit. And so
Right.
to think outside that box and think, like, I'll never forget, I did an edit for a magazine once, and I got the pattern, and the very first line was row 1, start your project the way you always start it. And I thought, first of all, I think you missed writing the pattern, because that's not how you write a pattern. But second of all, don't, like, even just that thought process. Well, how do you start a pattern if you've never done it? I mean, forget the wording. The wording was a little silly, and I still laugh about it to this day. This was years ago. But just that thought process, I don't think you should think that way, because what if
Yeah.
you've never started a project?
Right. Yeah. And like, I think one thing that I had to learn with writing patterns in terms of starting projects was, okay, foundation crochet chain stitches, or do you do regular chain stitches? Like,
Yep.
and learning how valuable the foundation ones were in terms of like things that need some stretch. And I had no idea what those were, so I always just said chain. But then I had some testers that were like, hey, I think you need to use foundation stitch,
Yeah.
and then learning how to write that out on pattern,
Yes.
because it's different than when you just do normal chains.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things I learned is consistency. And then, so a lot of tech editors will also do proofreading. Some people break it down, some tech editors will break it down. Well, this is the pricing for proofreading, and this is the pricing for math, or, sizing, grading. But I see those proofreading errors, and so I'm not going to skip them. If you like, it's not a different pricing structure for me, because it's something I do. It's something I see, and whether you want it included in the price or not, I'm not going to skip over it and not tell you that you
Right.
spelled next wrong, or like, it's those little things. Like, to me, it's not for me. And I understand some people just want it proofread, or they just want the math checked, but I have to read through it to check the math. And so if I
Right.
see it, I'm just going to tell you.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so that's another thing, like, just spelling errors, and it seems like it's little things, or it's not a big deal. But again, if it's your pattern, you don't see the mistakes,
Oh yeah, I've spelled the wrong. Like, I
Yeah.
got the T because I think my
Yep.
computer auto-corrected it.
Yeah.
And I got that wrong. Or like adding that one extra space that doesn't need to be there, so then it creates that bigger little gap in
Yep.
between
And
words.
it's not consistent with the rest of your rows, which goes back to consistency.
Right. Oh
Some
yeah.
some companies or some designers will start every single row with a capital letter. Others don't. Like, so in independent designers, I will usually try and learn their way of writing,
Oh
because
yeah.
there is that slight variation. Like, there is a slight variation. Everybody can have their own style to an extent and still stick with the standard way of writing. Are you capitalizing your stitches? Are you doing lowercase? Are you putting periods at the end and stitch counts and all those things? Whereas the publishers I work for, they give me a style guide, and they're like, this is the way we want it. We want, everything from, the rows are bold, or the rows aren't bold, or we have periods at the end, or we don't have periods at the end, or stitch counts at every row unless the stitch count doesn't change. There's those little things and every publisher does it slightly different.
So
Which
true.
is hard for independent designers that
Yes.
submit, because then you have to submit to their style guide,
Oh,
so that's where I come in, and they just have me go over it again, because sometimes when you do submit to all different publishers, you can't, it's hard to keep up with all the rules and what they want, and
I've done patterns for a couple of different magazines, and seeing how they do their styles, like each one has been different. And like, then one of them, or two patterns I've done, have been UK terms. So then having to convert Yes.
convert it.
Not only learning a style guide for a pattern, but also learning what are the terminology that they use instead.
Yep.
How do I change my pattern to work with this? It's crazy how all of those like tiny things
Yeah.
really just add up when you're writing a pattern.
Yeah. And I edit for a designer that is, she's over there somewhere. I want to say Netherlands or UK. I'm not really exactly sure now that it's not right there in the center of my brain. And she will write her patterns in both UK and US terms. So she has me check them and make sure, did I convert it right? And a lot of times she'll convert them right, but the spelling of stuff is wrong. So she'll have me go through and like realize is an S over there and it's a Z here, or color has a U over there and not here. And she wants me to pick up on all those little things because to her it's not second nature to change the spelling to US spelling and things like that.
Right. Yeah, I know. Now that I think about it with the spelling, I was like, ooh, I didn't catch that on some of my patterns I sent to the UK magazine.
Yeah. And it's because you just write it, and we don't think that way.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. It's so hard it's really, really hard to be consistent. It's really hard as a designer to do that.
Yes.
I even will be writing a pattern and I'm like, oops, I worded it that way and then wrote the rest of the pattern without that. So half is one way, half is another way.
Yep.
My editor catches it and I'm like, well, yep, you are correct. I was totally
Exactly.
What have been some of speaking about like consistency and all of that, what are some of the different mistakes that you've seen be the most common in patterns that like designers can keep an eye out for in their patterns? Or what are things that you really like notice, hey, this is something that happens a lot and we can improve on that?
I think it's usually little things. For the most part, I think designers focus on the math. And for the most part, because that's the focus, it's either really not wrong or maybe there just might be a mistake here or there. But as far as like consistency, making sure that you, in the hook size, don't just put the letter, don't just put the number, like add the millimeters, add the, like those little things, add the gauge swatch, which I know a lot of people don't use it, but your gauge swatch should actually be based on how you crochet, not what's on the label. Like I have one that used to put what was on the label on the pattern, those little things. I just had a conversation with a designer because she wanted to write 13 single crochet instead of single crochet in the next 13 stitches. And she's like, I don't like it that way. It takes up more writing space. You can do whatever you want. It's your pattern. You're an independent designer. I won't make you correct it.
Right.
But from a readability standpoint, if you put 13 single crochet and then you put 2 single crochet, somebody reading that isn't going to know which one has 13 in the same stitch, which one has 2 in the same stitch. Like they're not going to be able to decipher what you mean. And so as much as sometimes we feel like we want to make it shorter so the pattern isn't 9 pages or even 5 pages, sometimes I feel like that's the consistency we need. Like for the most designers have that standard of writing where they'll write it the same way as everybody else. But I think it's important, even if you want to be different or you want to do it differently, I get it. I understand it. But that doesn't help the crocheter who, has been crocheting for 20 years and then all of a sudden she gets a pattern and it's not coming out the way she wants it. And so if you don't want to filter requests for helping or those things, then it's really important from that consistency standpoint. You might want to be different. You might want to write it the way you want to write it. But if it's not consistent, you're confusing the crocheter and really, you're writing it for the crocheter.
Right. Oh yeah. Like I've been amazed at and I think that's one thing that's good about having testers is realizing how much people want to be told what to do when writing a pattern.
Yes.
Like not leaving things up to interpretation. That's something that I've had to learn just because I've been crocheting for most of my life. So I understand like, oh, I can kind of fill in the blanks. If something's not there, oh yeah, I know how to do it. But like in some of my garment patterns, like, oh, okay, we're doing color work here. We need to specify, oh, you're carrying the yarn as you work. So, and then like having tutorials for how to do that and just all those little details of like, okay, you're reading this chart here. This is what you do with the chart and this is how then you use it with the rest of the pattern. Just, I don't necessarily like writing super lengthy patterns, but because I've had so many people be like, hey, I need more help with this. I'm like,
and
okay, I'll do that.
If people are consistently asking for help, that's something that either you're not clarifying correctly or it could be clarified better. Maybe it's not that you're not clarifying it correctly, but maybe there's a second way you could word it, or not. If it's a written pattern, it's kind of hard to word it two ways. But if you're doing a video, you might be able to say, here's another way of doing it, or and that's a good way, a good judge of what can I fix on my patterns? What can I do better? If you're constantly getting questions, then that's probably the first thing you should work on changing, fixing, altering how you're doing it.
Yeah. And I know once I figured out, okay, this is the easier way to word it, then the questions stopped because I got way less. And then if I had testers, it was on just a stitch count problem of like, hey, this number is wrong. It should be this.
Yes.
I'm like, oh, okay. That's what I'll do. What are some things that for designers, how you would recommend, like when it comes to the math and kind of writing out different stitches, how do you recommend, like what's the easiest way for designers to do that?
So if you make a gauge swatch, you will have that math. You will know my pattern has 8 stitches per repeat or 3 stitches per repeat. And then sometimes you have those stitches at the end or at the beginning that are slightly different. So if you have like a 3 stitch repeat, but you only skip 1 at the end on each end, it's not going to be a 3 stitch repeat on the ends. So then you'll have to add those stitches back in. So if you take the repeats and do the math on this is the size of the repeat, it's easier to get the math for like say a sweater or garment and get that repeat. And you can figure out the math. And then what I recommend normally is do each size separately. So if you have, like increases on row 8 and 10 and 15, sometimes it's easier to go through and do all the smalls first and do, the math on every, so your brain is only working on that one size and you're not trying to do like row 8 and you get those. I just did this. I just had a pattern and it was after a really long week of tech editing and my kids were here and my testers were sending me a message going, I don't think this is right. And I'm like, I have the math all in front of me. I had it all like on a piece of paper. And what I had done was I had reversed the stitch counts with the repeats. Oh. So I had the math correct, but I just plugged them in the pattern in the wrong spot,
Right.
And I think sometimes it's those little things like I knew what I was talking about. And they were like, I know what you're saying, but it's wrong. So, that's one of the things, if you're struggling, just do one size at a time. And sometimes you'll see a pattern. So if you can do the extra small, the medium, and the large, you'll see that pattern for the extra large. And you'll know, okay, maybe this stitch count has to be slightly different because of, how you wanted the garment to fit, as far as the, the ease of it. But it'll give you a better idea. It'll give you that overall pattern that you're looking for in the math.
Yeah, I know. I used to try to figure it out all at once, but I've been trying to focus more on one size at a time, or like I learned how to use a spreadsheet for calculating all my math so that it's not as wrong as it
And
is.
I'm still a paper and pen person. I'm probably the most backwards tech editor designer ever. I still I chart it all out, I graph it all out, I put it on paper, and then I'll do like my gauge swatch, and I'll try and increase to match the math of the, finished size that I need. I'm a visual person, so I just like that. I don't know. It goes back to that math problem solving brain, not the creative, but the.
You like the being able to write it out and see it all,
Yes.
all the work and all the puzzle come together.
Yeah.
I made way too many mistakes when I did that, and so I just had to be like, I need a computer to help me with my math because
maybe I should use a computer for double checking so that my testers don't question me. So it's not foolproof. I'm a designer and a tech editor, and I still make mistakes. And that is some of the point of a tech editor, is having that third set of eyes look at it, and from you look at it from a perspective of, if I were crocheting this and it was a pattern I had purchased, how am I going to read this? How am I going to see it? Is it going to work for me?
Right. Oh yeah. I know that I don't catch mistakes. I don't catch things, and then someone else looks at it and they can see it, and I swear that I got it right. I swear this is all correct. But then, nope, sorry, you didn't do this, or forgetting stitch counts on things. Totally forgot to add that on this size. It definitely helps as a designer, me feel more confident that what I'm putting out can be made by people.
Yes.
Because otherwise, you're like, well, I hope someone can make this.
Yeah. And I know a lot of, and because I'm a designer, I know that there's that cost effective. You're putting out a design for a scarf or, something, a washcloth, a dishcloth, and do you really want to pay a tech editor when, and so.
Yeah.
It's different than when it's a magazine and they want everything to match their style guide, and they want it perfect, and they want every single pattern to look like it's written by the same person. And, it's very different. And I've even advised some crocheters, it's like, if you're just doing a square, if you want me to look at it, I'll look at it. And, you make the call on whether it's good, and I'll just look at it quick. Or, I've even said to some designers that are just starting out, if it's been tested and your testers didn't find any errors and it's a square, then there's probably no errors. Or you may be able to help somebody quickly if,
Right. Oh, yeah.
Something.
Yeah, I just use tech editors for my garments, just because I want to make sure that, okay, will this sizing work out? Will the math work out? But I don't usually get my blankets tested. One, because they're huge projects. Two, I do a lot of corner to corner, so Stitch Fiddle writes the pattern all up for me, and then everything's correct because it just went off of the graph created. Yeah. So I'm like, oh, that doesn't need to be tech edited because I know it's right.
Yeah, that's a good way.
Yeah, and definitely I wish that there were more pattern writing softwares out there, just so that they could get all of those little things more correct, because that's what's nice with color work, is having Stitch Fiddle be able to generate your pattern and use that.
Yep.
Yeah. I know I had some more questions about tech editing, but of course they just went out. Are there any other ways that you have why you recommend doing tech editing besides consistency and being able to proofread? Do you see it as being really helpful when putting out certain types of patterns, like how you said with garments?
I think garments are the biggest things with a lot of different stitches, like if you had a sampler afghan or things like that, because the stitch repeats don't always match up, or they don't always work. And so if you have somebody look at it from that perspective, somebody was recently asking me what the difference between a proofread editor and a tech editor is. And we got into this whole math conversation, and I said, but not everything that's divisible by 4 is divisible by 8. So, so those certain things, if you have a certain stitch for like the first 6 inches and it's divisible by 4, and your next stitch combo is divisible by 8, it may or may not work. You know, and most brains would think, well, yeah, 4 is divisible by 8, but that doesn't necessarily, but 4 is also divisible, you know, you can make a 12 and you can't do that with an 8.
Right.
You
That's
know?
so true. I've definitely been seeing that of just like as I'm writing color work ones of looking at like, okay, I want to try to have this many repeats of this design. How am I going to divide that? And that was the 4 and 8 one was something that I was like, what? How is this possible? Like it should work.
Yeah.
This should be the same. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But then it
and
just didn't work out.
Colors and doing color work, and you get into those kind of divisible numbers, it's very, okay, now I have to do an increase in my main color because I can't change the size of the design, you know, like
Right. Oh, yeah.
You know, like your bees, you can't change the size of the bees, so you can't put the increases there. You have to put them somewhere else. And
yep. Yeah, learning like with color work designs, a lot of times what works best is doing it, like if you're doing a circular yoke, you have the increases on the sides of your chart section, and then you just increase you end up doing 2 increases right next to each other, but then it gives it still that circular design, and then you don't have to calculate in the middle of a bee, like, oh, this needs to be an increase.
Oh, my bee stretched a little bit.
Yeah. Or with different sizes, like, okay, their bee is a little weird right here, but you know, okay. What are some resources that you really recommend for designers to utilize when they're writing patterns, that you use yourself or that you tell different designers to use for pattern writing?
One of the things I recommend, and it's not necessarily a course or anything, I highly recommend to beginning designers or, you know, designers that are just like, I had a journal of patterns for probably a year before I started typing them out and writing them and selling them and things like that. And one thing I did was I would read other people's patterns and say, this didn't make sense to me, so I want to make sure I make this clear to somebody else. Or I love how this designer does this. I mean, don't copy work. That's totally off the charts. And I'm not saying copy, but I'm saying there are certain things that, you know, whether it's they always give you the yarn like I always tell people what yarn I use. People don't want to hear that I use red, white, and blue. They want to hear that I used Hobby Lobby, I love this yarn, or Red Heart Super Saver. They don't, in their mind, they want to match it perfectly. If they're buying your pattern, most of it is a visual thing. Right. And so they want that information. Or, you know, if you like the designers always put stitch counts at the end of their rows, then put stitch counts at the end of your rows.
Yeah.
You know, it's those little things that if it made a difference to you, it's going to make a difference to somebody else.
That's so true. Like I know that I had some patterns that I didn't put stitch counts at the end, and people commented and were like, hey, it would be really helpful if you would put this on there, just because otherwise you're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to have. I want to
count 232 stitches every row though.
I don't pay attention to it. I don't count my stitches.
I only count the first row.
Right? I'm like, I gotta make sure I have this. Don't interrupt me. I'm counting.
Exactly.
Have you found it? Do you usually use like the Craft Yarn Council standards for your tech editing? Because I know that's what a lot of people recommend that they need to do, which I recommend that to everybody.
Yeah, that's and that's what even the publishers that I publish for, that's what they recommend. Like, you just follow those guidelines, you know, within reason. I mean, obviously, if you have a crop top, you're gonna wing it because everybody's midsection is different length, or you know, how you want it to fit. If you have 10 inches of ease, then, you know, it might be 10 inches on me and 12 inches on you, or things like that. But yeah, as far as a standard or guidelines, that's what I use. That's what I go by.
And what are the like different measurements that are available on there if like people haven't been on there and don't know what's available?
So they give almost everything. They give, they will do shoulder width. If you want just like the length of the width of the shoulders, they do like wrist to wrist all the way across. And then they do length from the neck to the waist. And then they tell you how to add, do you want your, like if it's a sweater, do you want the sweater to end at the waist? Do you want it to end at the hips? Do you want it to be like more tunic length? And they'll tell you, okay, take your measurement and then add, I think you add 6 inches for hip length and 10 inches for tunic length. So they give you all those measurements. They give you the armpit measurements as far as like, I think, standard depth is 7 inches for a small, 7.5 for a medium, I believe, or something like that. So they'll give you those measurements for making the yarn, the hole for the arm sleeve. They give length of arm from the underarm. So you have the length all the way across, but then you also have the underarm length.
Yeah.
They give circumference around the bust, and I think they do hips. I believe they do hips as well.
Yeah. They've got waist and so they don't have I wish they had the neck to hips measurement because that would make life easier, but unfortunately they don't.
No, they don't.
I know there's all those like little measurements that I've found like, oh man, I wish they had this, that I've had to be like asking people, or I've Googled what is the measurement for this to see if someone out there has a chart.
Well, and I believe they also do like head circumference. I don't know if they do head circumference, but they'll do like, they do have head circumference. See, which that I just know I've done so many times, but they do like they'll do hand circumference if you're doing mittens. And I think they do foot length and maybe ankle circumference.
I believe so, yeah.
They have quite a bit. I think over the years, there's only been like one where I'm like, oh, I wish they would do this measurement, like just like maybe neck, neck.
Yeah.
It's like, how wide do you really want the neck? Like, I understand the shoulders are 17.5, but at what point, like, they don't do this shoulder length, like, because that's all determined by the design. Do you want it wider, narrower, Yeah.
I've had to figure out how to do that on my own.
Yeah.
That was something that I needed to know with doing the colorwork designs, because I have to figure out, okay, if I'm going to the shoulders, how many rows do I need to do in order to get from my neckline to my shoulders? Because I need to be able to fit all the colorwork in that amount of rows. Otherwise, it throws it all off.
Yeah.
And I think that they're really great baseline measurements. And
absolutely, yeah. Especially if you've never done any design work or you don't really know like what. It's easy to take a design or a pattern from a designer and say, oh, I should probably make a medium because I wear a medium. But did they do it medium fitted? Like, so if you have those measurements, you can even look at, the standards and say, I don't really want it to fit that tight. Maybe I'll go up a size.
Right. Yeah. And especially with pattern writing, like you're only one size. You don't know what other sizes need.
Right.
And they come really in handy.
Yeah. And it's hard to get testers for every size. And I try really hard.
Yeah.
But sometimes a designer won't be able to find somebody to test like an extra large or a 2X. And so they don't have that one size tested. And, so you need something to go off of.
Right. And then having the tech editor look at it so that they can make sure that it works.
Say, like I recently I did a tech edit for a sweater and the neck was really wide. And so the yarn company was like, can you just look at this? Because it was saying it was like a lot wider than a normal like pullover would be, and it was a tee. I think it was a summer tee or whatever. And I did a lot of research on it because like I said, Craft Yarn Council doesn't give like width of the neck or even circumference of the neck, and it doesn't give the shoulders. It'll just give you the total and you figure it out. And so I went back because I edit for a couple different publishers. I went back through my records and I'm like, I think I saw someone way back that did a wider tee, like a wider neck. And right. So I researched it and I went back and I found a tee that we had done for a publisher that I edit for. And the magazine approved it. It was a wider neckline and it was just based on that design. And this design almost matched up. So the neckline was a little wider than normal, but it wasn't like so wide that I'd be like, it's probably going to fall off the shoulders. Like, so some of it is just designer's perception. Like, yes, it was way wider than normal, probably, by 3 or 4 inches, but it wasn't so bad that it was just one of those things that you have to kind of do the research. Like sometimes it's,
right, yeah.
Craft Yarn Council is a great place to start, but that doesn't mean you can't veer from it. That doesn't mean you can't put your own spin on it or your own interpretation of it. You want baggier armpits or more fitted armpits, then, take that into consideration. Or I have a slightly longer torso. I'm not tall, but my torso is longer than my legs. So I will add a couple extra rows to my sweaters because I like them that way.
Right. Oh, yeah. But doing my llama sweater was one of the patterns that I've written that really tested how different people's measurements were, because I had kid sizes through adult sizes, and all my testers for the kids ones were like, yeah, my kid is a little bit different here, so they're not the normal measurement, so I have to add this length. And I was just like, I don't know what to write into the pattern beyond adjust to your child, but it's crazy
and
how
it's
different
hard when you're starting out designing. So there's so many variations that you can take that interpretation and make it your own, as long as you don't want a fitted sweater to have a neckline that barely hangs on the shoulders, or you don't want, you need to, it's hard to start designing, but I think most designers will come up with their own style, so to speak, and that becomes kind of what they, like you with your graphs, like, or your color work. That's your niche, that's what you've come to love, and you're good at it. And I think it's the same thing with designing. If you find what you love, you'll excel at it and you'll grow, and your pattern writing will grow and your designing will grow. And you might, even the best designers, I'm sure, look back in 5 years and they're like, what in the world was I thinking when I wrote that,
Oh, yeah. I looked at all my first patterns that I wrote and I was like, I can't even read this anymore. Like, I wrote this and I don't even know what I was saying.
I've been designing since, like I said, 2007. And I look at some of my older patterns and I'm like, I really have to go back and rewrite these. They're not bad. I don't think there's errors. It's just, I have changed. I have, my writing has evolved. I've kind of found my voice and I've found the way I want to do things. And there are certain things, like I wrote, I would go back, and some yarn has been discontinued after 13 years, and I would just put maybe alternative replacements or things like that. Like, it's just a learning process. I don't think anybody is the perfect designer when they start, and they're not perfect at writing patterns. And
even when you do it for years, you're not perfect.
Oh.
Yeah.
But it's being determined to figure it out, use those standards, use what you've learned over the years and figure out how to make it work.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's crazy seeing the growth that, like, I've had in my different patterns, and just seeing how once you do find your voice with how you write your patterns, how then you just grow and your patterns grow with you. They become clearer, you can reach more people with them, and it's just such a learning process of having to figure out, how do I write this? Yeah. How do I make this clear? How do I convey my idea to the world?
Yeah. And going back to that, make it your own, there are a ton of ways to do a magic ring,
right?
And so that was one of the first things I published on my blog, was how to do a magic ring, and it's still 13 years later, it's my most popular blog post, and most people love it, but some people are like, well, I like the way I do it. Your way isn't wrong. And so it's very similar with pattern writing. Like, some of it is just it's a preference at what works for you, and other things you have to take a step back and go, is this going to make sense to somebody else? Are they going to understand it the way and if you use that magic ring example, your way may not make sense to people, but my way might, or vice versa. And so, convey that in your pattern writing, like try and make it as clear as you can so that anybody could pick it up. Because if somebody can pick up your pattern and they can make it and they love it and it comes out exactly the way they wanted, they will buy another pattern from you.
So true.
And
You'll
so
get a fan.
I get questions from people saying, I got a pattern from so-and-so and they won't help me with it. Can you help me? And I love helping people, so I will help them. But sometimes it's help those people, because if you help them figure out your pattern, one, you'll have a satisfied customer. And two, you could learn, okay, maybe if I change this or do this a little differently, it'll make it clear for the next person. I won't get all those questions.
Right. Oh, so true. So true. I've been really working on doing that and adding all those things like, oh, someone asked me a question about this. Okay, I'm going to add it to the pattern to make sure that anyone else who had this will be able to understand.
And then changing it going forward so that, but then, at some point, maybe changing it going backwards too, and going back and fixing it on all the other ones that you didn't do that for.
Right. Well, our time is almost coming to a close. Do you have any other last tips, whether it's about needing a tech editor or pattern writing that you can offer the watchers of this video?
Try it. Try writing a pattern. You will either love it or you won't. Some people, I've had people tell me, thank you, I have no desire to write a pattern. I don't want to do the math. I just want to sit and relax. And that's the thing, is once you start pattern writing, crochet really isn't relaxing. I mean, it can be relaxing, but it takes on a whole new meaning, because now you're really writing it for somebody else. And so you can't just sit there and make it a relaxing project. So if you're looking for, yes. So, and that's why I also recommend that designers buy other people's patterns. I always thought, I design my own. I don't need to buy anybody else's pattern now. And at some point, a couple of years into that thought process, I was like, well, wait a minute. If I buy somebody else's, first of all, I can learn from them. Maybe I'll learn something new. Maybe I'll learn a new technique. Maybe I'll learn a better way of writing something. But second of all, you're supporting them, and that can be your relaxing project.
Right.
You don't have to worry about the math. You don't have to worry about, making sure the fit or making sure it's perfect for somebody else. They've done that work. You're supporting them, and, and you get your relaxing crochet, and you can also try designing your own patterns on the side.
I totally get that. I have to remind myself, like, okay, sometimes crochet is not relaxing for me because I'm worried about the fit. So sometimes if I want a relaxing pattern to design, then I'll just do a pillow or something that's really simple that I don't have to worry about. How's this going to fit over my bust or my shoulders? Or
I actually edit for a friend of mine. She's a designer, and I do tech editing for her now. And randomly, she will make something for herself, and she's like, I'm not writing this pattern. I'm just making it. I don't even care. People are going to love it and ask me for the pattern, and I'm going to just say, nope, it was for fun. And that's her creative outlet. Like, I just want to sit down and crochet. I don't want to worry about the math. I don't want to worry about the fit. I don't want to have to size it. This is my relaxing project, and I just don't care. So. Yeah.
And sometimes I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to show anyone. They don't need to see this. I don't want to be asked to make this.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today and for sharing your expertise about tech editing and pattern writing. Super, super helpful stuff. I'm sure people are going to love it. And everyone who's watching, be sure to check out Christine's website, ambassadorcrochet.com. And she does tech editing. She has great patterns, and
if anybody has any other questions, they can contact me, because this is my passion. Like, I just love helping people with that kind of thing. So.
I'll include links in the description below. Leave any comments on this video, and I'll make sure Christine sees them if you've got questions for her. And we can't wait to see how this helps you guys. Well, thank you. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Bye.
Thank you so much for watching this video. Be sure to like it below if you enjoyed watching it, and hit the subscribe button if you never want to miss out a video from me, and also check out my other videos and tutorials on my channel. See you next time!